but they're trying to move away from blackness. And it's something about black that even in the political arena, people will address everything but black. So can you just speak a little bit about the exceptionality of blackness so that we can feel that Jane Brown said, I'm black and I'm proud?
Yeah, I will be delighted to, my sister Rosie. And see, what blacks are being called now is African American. That is an insult to black people. Most of them don't know it. Jesse Jackson started that way back during the Civil Rights Movement, suggesting we should be African Americans. We are not African Americans. What black folks should be riding home on to fight back as a strategy to block white racism in the country. And I'll explain what racism is in a minute. You should not be calling yourself African American. You play right into white people's hand. You say when you slap Africa in front of black, because that's what they wanted to do. Starting about 1840s, what white folk wanted when they saw there was a lessening of an interest in slavery, and they felt black folk were getting a little up and they might want to get out of slavery. They said, well, what we need to do is name them again African Americans. They picked up that label and started trying, well, we'll send them back to Africa. And they went to the presidents and they asked them, say, if we had to give up blacks, what would we do with them if we had to give them up for any reason? And Lincoln and some others later came up and said, well, we can always send them back, send them to the Bahamas, and they can live in the Bahamas, ship them out of the country, because we don't want black folks here intermingling with white folk, because white folks are the gifted group based on the first law of the country saying this is a white nation. And so we can maybe send them to the Bahamas. Then they said, no, let's not do that. Let's pick some land like across the Mississippi River, like the whole piece that's labeled Texas now. And let's send them to Texas. Send all black folk to release in slavery and send them to Texas. And others said, well, no, we're going to develop that land shortly. They said, no, where else can we send them? And so then a couple of presidents came in and says, let's send them to Liberia. Let's send them and ship them out of the country back to Africa. And that started that whole back to Africa movement. Send them out of here. Pretend that they've never done anything, that they've been a liability to us, which is another big lie. The wealth, all the wealth being created in this country was coming from the backs of black folk. And I told you black folk were very important to this country. The backs of black folk was like American Express card or Visa card. All you had to do is own one slave or two slaves at best, and you can have more ownership and assets than the typical white person up north if you included his land, his home, his machinery, and all of his animals and whatever money he might have in the bank. The greatest generator of wealth at that time was the back of a black slave. And so they wanted to make sure that they keep blacks in here. So they said, no, we can't use that. And so they didn't send any blacks. They sent a few blacks and a few volunteered to go back to Africa or to Liberia. And well, most of them wanted to stay here. And so, but in the meantime, after those first 3 or 4 ships had landed here and had dropped off their cargo of blacks from Africa, after that, we did not have any more blacks from Africa. As a matter of fact, the last ship to bring in Africans, blacks directly from Africa into America, was in 1808. Because in the Constitution that they drew up in 1809 and approved in 1889 was that slavery, commercially hauling slaves in, would have to end by 1808. The last one pulled into Alabama and dropped a load of slaves off. After that, they could not raise slaves. Could not bring slaves into the country anymore. And so consequently, every black, here's a major point that you gotta remember, is that every black in America, that's since that time, 1808, there were no more African Americans coming to this country. Every black walking this grounds in this continent, on this continent, he was not an African American. He had become a Native American. He had no knowledge about Africa. And 99% of the black folk in this country right now were here before 99% of all other human beings that are on the earth in the Carolina, in America right now. That black folk on the earth, walking the grounds, they were here before all other people. That means all whites, all Asians, all American Indians, all Filipinos, all Koreans, and so on and so forth. Black people, 99% of all the black people in this country are natives, And I want you to start calling them natives. They're not no African Americans. They have no connection to Africa unless they want to go there for a trip, a vacation sometime, just to go over there and look around or go over there and go through a few ceremonies. But no blacks in America are getting, except those who come in since then, they don't get any birthday cards or Christmas cards, Easter cards. They don't get any gifts or presents from Africans. They don't go attend ceremonies and learn the languages. Like, for instance, in Nigeria, there are over 200 languages, 200 languages and 200 different ethnic groups, black ethnic groups over there, just in that country alone.
Okay, Dr. Ann, I want you to explain exceptionality. I think it's a key theory that you developed.
Okay, now I'm leaving that in the topic now, Rosie, which you haven't understood. Don't call yourself African American. That plays right in the hands of whites who don't want blacks anymore because they don't have slavery anymore, and they lost that value in the Civil War. And that's why they mean, that's part of the reason why they hate black folk right now. They're mean towards blacks because they hold black folks responsible for creating what they call a civil war and losing the value and the land they had at that time. And so they blame black folk. But in fact, that had nothing to do with black folk. It's because black folk were Native Americans. And these American Indians have switched their names now from American Indians to Native to try to compete with you for that word native, Native. You come before American Indians. Blacks were in this country way before anybody else. You were the first people in this country. Now, in exceptionality, I put in one of my books, I put in a list of all the exceptions you have. Black people are nothing but a bucket of exceptions. There is not one thing that black folk were treated like any other human beings or any immigrants coming to this country. Don't let them again start talking about you all gotta prove to us that you've done something. Black folk were the initial people whose backs were used to clear the land of the rocks, snakes, bears, and everything. Black people built the damn bridges. They built the damn canals all through the East Coast. They built the highways, byways, water byways, where they could have boats go up and down through those canals. Black people built the Capitol buildings in this area. They built all the major oldest schools in this country were built by black hands. Blacks were the only people that were productive. Whites weren't producing anything. They did not come here to be producers. They came here to be managers of black folk and to get rich by just getting free land and getting free labor. And you don't have to, that's in every book. Any history book, even the white history books will tell you, again, that the builders of this country were black folk. But again, those individuals who came here from European heritage, they wanted to get ahead of black folk and pretend that somehow they were equal to or above black folk, superior to them. That was another lie. As a matter of fact, as Andrew Johnson said, that in this country, land and labor brings the wealth. But the land is free. You can come to this country and get all the free land you want. You can come here and say, I want some land. And you say, I want it from here to that mountain over there. They would give it to you because there was value. Land had little value that time. The value in land only came when you put black slaves on it. And black slaves brought 90% of the wealth in this country to land. And that's why everybody was trying to get land. And so the founding fathers, with the systems they set up for every immigrant coming from Europe, they were coming here as free loaders. That's another word you all never use. You should be calling them what they are. Europeans are freeloaders. They came here strictly to get rich. They did not come here to build a nation. They could care less about a nation. They had nations all over Europe. They came here to get free land and free labor. And so consequently, the father set up a system that gave every white coming to this country, the minute his feet touched the ground, he could get approximately 650 free acres of land. Again, I repeat that every white person coming from Europe could come into the United States after the so-called founding father set up a structure called the Constitution. They could pick up 650 acres of free land. And that's how they got rich. It was with free land and free black labor from slaves. It was humanly impossible for anybody to come to this country and not become rich. And so now, let's jump back to our civil rights leaders. That's why the civil rights front and movement failed. That's why social integration failed, because our people never addressed the real cause of slavery. It was to use black folk again and the land to generate wealth and power. And so consequently, the whole point of slavery is that they systematically use slavery to maldistribute 100% of all the land in America, all the minerals in the ground in America, all the water, wood, everything, coal, oil. They maldistribute everything of value into the hands of those whites coming in from Europe. And
okay, Dr. Anderson, can I cut in and ask you another
yes,
question?
you most certainly can. You most certainly can. And let me keep quiet for a minute. Go right ahead.
Why is it that Black people tend to sympathetically and empathetically align themselves with other people? Like I heard a lot of Black folks saying during, I think it was Katrina or other areas, where, you know, we have symptoms because we are refugees. I've heard Black refugees. I've heard Black folks say they're refugees. I hear them when you talk about immigration and when we talk about what's happening now with people coming into this country. I've heard them say, well, we should be the last one to say anything about it because we left Mississippi to come to California to do better. I'm trying to understand why Black folks can really put themselves in the shoes of everybody but themselves. And on that point, with the influx of immigration, what's happening in this country today, how far is that going to set Native Blacks much further behind?
Well, because for one very simple reason is that when they drafted the Constitution, and that was George Mason and also Alexander Hamilton, and what was the right of the Constitution again? They give him credit for it. Huh?
Thomas Jefferson.
Thomas Jefferson. And Thomas Jefferson was chosen because he also wrote the Bill of Rights for this country. And they all commented on his writing ability and say, you're an excellent writer. You have a good way of writing and saying words that just touch our hearts. And so we want the three of y'all to write up a constitution. And so out of 57 people attending the Constitutional Convention in Philadelphia, they chose those three people to write the Constitution. And so, and Thomas Jefferson did most of the writing, and they wrote that. But he used what his trick was, he used trickery to write it because nobody else wanted to be involved because they couldn't figure out how to do it. They were saying among themselves, how do you write a constitution about all these wonderful things that they learned in Europe about? We talk about freedom, fraternity, love, and care for, and all opportunities and Americans' dreams and all that. How did they do that? But what he did, he used broad, ambiguous terms to whenever he talked about anything, he used big terms that nobody could define. They never could define them and what the term meant. and that's, as a matter of fact, when I was in the White House with Jimmy Carter, we had when Nixon came in, he picked up the same technique and called Haldeman, his chief staff member, into the White House office and says, when you start talking about race, do not use very specific terms like blacks and Negroes. Don't use those terms. He said, use broad, ambiguous terms so nobody would know what you're talking about. Call them minorities. Call them poor people. Call them people that are in poverty people. Call them any name you want that signifies a very broad, ambiguous group. And that way nobody will know. He says, and even throw gender into there. And consequently, they use that in the Constitution the second time. And they use that so that nobody would know what you're talking about. And also, all these bills coming out of Congress, they're going to use the very broad words. They're not going to talk about blacks. They're going to say minorities. And black folk bought into that. And so they started calling themselves minority. They didn't know what minority meant. Minority meant a loser.
And Dr. Anderson, and you're absolutely right, because when there are companies that would say, oh, we hire minorities, that's what you said we need to do. Yeah, they did, but they did not hire black people, because people tend to be afraid of the word black or to specifically designate something for blacks. Even all the politicians that we get, the same thing. They're going to do a lot for the minority, the poor people, the people of color, and black folks are left out of it. So that's why I thought your exceptionality theory was so great, because no one has gone through what black folks have had to experience, and no one has made America, the wealthy, did not get rich off the backs of other people. So I believe when we accept the fact, the exceptionality, and don't align ourselves to say we are all minorities, we all came from this or that. So that's why I was glad you mentioned on that. Let's move down to reparation. And I know there's been so many opportunities for a portion of reparation that we never got and we didn't fight for. That's the black